Okay, class, we are back again, and we're talking about the last text that we're going to have in this class, which is John Russon's Human Experience. And I have to just admit right off the bat that I think that this is an amazing work. I've taught it many, many times and had a lot of luck with it. I think genuinely believe that a lot of the real secrets about understanding ourselves and living happy, virtuous, excellent lives um, are in this book. I really think it's an amazing work. I've given it to people that are friends of mine because I think it's that valuable. It's not just about learning philosophy as some sort of academic discipline. I think Russon has a lot of very important insights in how to live well. I know the guy. He was a professor at Penn State while I was there. He's since moved on and has a job in Canada, and this book won a lot of awards, and he's getting a lot of attention, and he travels around the world. I think he's in Turkey right now teaching a class on Hegel. Really important guy, really intelligent guy, and I think this work is amazing. So let's just get started right at the top. I'm going to have to, you'll notice the PowerPoints are a lot more detailed because unlike Descartes, you're not going to find a lot of stuff online walking you through the arguments because it's not Descartes, it's not from 1641, it's from 2000 and I think 4, right? It's much more recent work. Okay, so starting at the top, read the introduction very carefully. The summary of the chapter is clear account of what he wants to do. Lots of little gems in there that I'll be pointing to. So make sure that you're coming back to those analyses of the chapters as we move forward, and because he gives you a kind of it's nice to have a general overview, like a roadmap, like what is he trying to do in this chapter? Because as you see, a lot of the sentences are incredibly difficult, and so it's nice to come back to the beginning and see kind of where a lot of the ideas came from, and to get a sense for what you should be paying attention to. The thing about this book is that it really, really, really builds. So I want you to do a little experiment. Look right now at page 72. On 72, the partial paragraph at the top, he says he wants to articulate the cosmopolitan extreme that marks the most fully fledged social structure because this will show us the terminus ad quem, the goal, the inherent goal of the development of human self-identity, the form of the inherent goal of the human project of mutual equal recognition. So this is a huge claim. He's saying he's going to outline what is the just from an analysis of all human experience, he's going to outline what is the inherent goal of interpersonal contact, and on the basis of that, give a sense of what political society should be, how it should be structured, what should its logic and rationale be, on the basis of a deep analysis of what it means to be human. That's one hell of a huge claim. You notice where it's Sacred Heart, we have our common core, right? We have this question, what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to live a life of meaning and purpose? Those two questions lead to that fourth question, what is it, why is it important? How is it important to work to forge a more just society? So the proper structure of a society that has justice is in our common core connected to what does it mean to be human, right? If human beings are the kind of things that can't be free on their own, they need to be controlled, then a just society would be one with a king or a dictator or an autarch, something like that. If, on the other hand, what it means to be human and live a life of meaning and purpose is about self-determination, then the proper structure of society needs to be open to difference, education, and have individuals having as much freedom as possible, right? Those different conceptions of what it means to be human are going to lead us to different conceptions of the proper structure of society. And here he's claiming to not build his concept of what the society should look like on the basis of a dogma, something that he simply accepts. He's going to walk you through the steps to build to seeing that there's a logical basis for this on the basis of something we can all, a set of premises that we can all agree on. Unlike Descartes' premises, we'll see this in a minute, it's about the immediacy of our experience, our awareness that here we are listening to a lecture, trying to get a degree, trying to make sense of my life, that just everyday experience that we have as human beings. That's the basis. And from that basis, especially looking at how we interact with other people, Russon's going to make this enormous claim. So what is the claim? This is the first full paragraph on 72. What form of contact would this universal society take? What would its narrative be? Basically, its narrative would have to be the very narrative articulated in the preceding pages. Okay, here he goes. It would have to advocate universality for a human population recognized to be creating itself as networks of self-transcending intersubjective contexts from out of specifically figured situations of social familiarity. The hell does that mean? Right? It's a lot of big words. Intersubjective contexts, figured situations of social. You don't know. You can't possibly read that page right now. Because what's on that page and the next pages and what goes on in chapter 5, which we're going to get to as much of chapter 5 as possible about neurosis, right? Right on the cover you see the word neurosis. Chapter 5 is called Neurosis. We're building to that, and then finally to philosophy. We probably won't get there in this class. Just the pace is just too intense as it is, and I apologize for that. But it's just what it has to be. 12 days. What are you going to do? In order to get to those things making sense, we've got to get the building blocks. And the building blocks start with just really easy to read sentences that make sense, but then you build and you build and you build and you build. So looking back to the introduction, looking back to the earlier chapters and the accounts of those early chapters, when you get to these later things, is really important. Because if you get lost in the beginning, you don't understand what interpretation in chapter 1 is, you're not going to understand how we're an interpretive synthetic being and how that interpretive synthesis takes place in a social familiarity situation in chapter 4. And then you won't understand how those interpretive capacities can be inappropriate given our new lives, right? We can have competing cognitive dissonance style interpretations of our world that lead us to neurotic inability to excel and be amazing and be as awesome as we could be, because we have different interpretations operating at different times that are working against one another. And sometimes we think we're awesome, sometimes we think, I suck, I suck, I suck, because maybe our mom was a bitch and told us we sucked, or we had a teacher that told us that, right? So we've got these internal dissent going on. You won't be able to understand how he articulates that dissent in the neurosis chapter unless you understand how these interpretive capacities work. So if you don't make it through chapter 1 well, and if you don't remember what we did in chapter 1, all the sentences are going to read like that sentence on chapter 7, on page 72. Does that make sense? So there's a building blocks. That's how this book works. So we got to work through it clearly and build that foundation. So you'll be looking back to this introduction where he tells you what each of the chapters is going to do. So, okay, so let's start at the top. It's page 1, right? Page 1 of the introduction. He tells us that what he's going to be doing is not nitpicking and looking at some differences. He's going to be taking 200 years of continental philosophy and kind of showing what its values is. So make sure to read slide 3. Obviously, the slides are very detailed, so I can go through this really quickly. He says a lot of the insight come from these 4 themes. We're going to talk about these 4 themes literally every day. This is the heart of the book, is understanding how we break down our experience into interpretation, embodiment, time, and others. Okay? This maps onto the first 4 chapters, so you know something's important. Chapter 4 happens after a break, right? There's the first 3 chapters, and then it says part 2, and you get chapter 4, others, and neurosis, right? So there's some important thing about others. We'll see what that all is. We know those 4 themes are important. Pay attention to them. Secondly, every experience has all 4 dimensions. So it's not like some experiences are interpretive, some experiences are embodied. Nope, not at all. All experiences have all of these dimensions. So let's look. Slide 6 tells you what's coming. Slide 7, we start off. Okay. First chapter, and you'll be talking about this today, because today you're working on both the introduction and the first chapter, which is interpretation. We're going to look at how we are active in determining the meaning of our situations. For Descartes, we sit outside of the world and we passively receive information. Okay? For Russon, it is absolutely essential that we don't no longer think of ourselves in that way. We are part of the world. We are an embodied part of the world. We are in the world. And the world that we receive through our senses is in large part determined by our own activity. And we're going to look at what that activity is and why it's important. Thus, we're not a static thing. It's not a passive thing. We're not just receiving the truth. Our own attitudes, our own input, our own preconceptions, our hopes, our dreams, our habits, our training, our past, all of these things are playing a role in what we see and what we experience, right? And thus, we're not ever going to be able to understand human experience from some sort of objective outside perspective. We have to understand it from the inside. So you're going to have to seek to understand your own experience by examining your own experience. And you have to understand experience of other people, which is going to be very important, from looking at their own background and their own approach to things. This is not going to end up in relativism. Some approaches to things lead people to be really unhappy and incapable of navigating their worlds effectively. Other approaches, other methods of interpretation and standpoints and outlooks lead people to be excellent and amazing and kind and compassionate and courageous and treat others with respect. These, yes, there are different standpoints that make treating, let's say, a gay person with respect and saying that they should be killed, like you're in Uganda, and Uganda just made it a life in prison for any homosexual act. Those two standpoints have their own truths. One of them leads to a closed society that can't last in history and is doomed. The other one is an openness to others that has value and is tolerant, right? So there are values from which to decide which standpoint is more important, which standpoint is better standpoint from which to interpret things. Without this, there's no reason to read philosophy or do any study or do any reading or become better or become educated, because all standpoints would be equally the same. Russon says all standpoints are determinative of the truth that they see, what they claim is true. But we have to learn how to engage in the practice of changing how we interpret the world to become better at it. Better at it in the sense of being able to live more fruitful, happy lives and build a more just society. So, very important that we are active interpreters, and we'll be talking about that in a moment. Second chapter, embodiment. We are an embodied being. This is going to have many different structures. The first structure of embodiment is that we are open to view. I am right now I'm literally looking at myself right now, watching myself. How I appear matters. The fact that people can see me matters to me. It changes how I live. So the first thing I learned about having a body is that people can see me. Secondly, I learned that, there are other views in the world. I am just this one body. I'm looking, I can see things. I can't see your room. I don't know what's behind your computer. You're seeing things that I can't see. You have no idea. I might not even have pants on. You wouldn't know. That's hilarious. I have pants on. But you don't know, right? Like, you can't see things that I can see. You can tell from looking at my eyes that I have a perspective on the world that reveals information to me that you lack, right? So insofar as I'm an embodied being, I can see your eyes. I can see you looking at me. I can see you seeing things that I don't see. I can ask you, look, is there something on my neck, right? Is there something behind me? Well, I can actually see behind me right now. Right? Is there something in my teeth? I can actually see that right now also. It's crazy. So I am incorporating as an embodied being other people's perspectives into my understanding of the world and into my understanding of myself. And that's going to be very important because our goal is self-esteem. So bodily engagement, another aspect really important of bodily engagement is habits. The fact that I talk with my hands, my ability to type, my ability to play guitar, my ability to drive a car, all of these things are habitual structures, and we're going to see that thinking works that way too, and life works that way too, that we're largely creatures of habit, that we're driven by habits. Okay, all of that's about embodiment, and we'll discuss that in Chapter 2. Chapter 3 is about time or temporality. The chapter is actually called memory, but that doesn't matter. And it's really important that if you're going to understand your own experience or any human experience, you have to understand how it takes place with a temporal horizon. There are stuff that happened before it in the habituation and training of that person, and there's stuff that happens in the future that's being expected. So the fact that you're going to have to write a post on this is part of how you're listening to this right now, right? That your future, your plans are determining your experience right now. No one in here is a philosophy major. I'm almost certain you wouldn't take an online class if you were a philosophy major. You wouldn't do it. You wouldn't want to. You'd want to spend the time and work more carefully at a slower pace and actually have a conversation with a philosophy professor at some point. So the fact that you guys don't have that as a dream, as a goal for yourself, is a huge part of what you're experiencing right now watching these online over the winter, right? So we know that in order to understand your experience right now in this class, we have to understand where you've come from and what you expect to happen in the future. All of your experience has a temporal dimension, a futural, past, and present character. Present character is about the synthesis, the fact that you're making meaning out of things. Fourth, other people. So on page 5, he tells us, this is the bottom of 5, definitely mark this, we'll be talking about this again in a moment. The fundamental struggle that defines the life of the person is the pursuit of self-esteem and self-understanding. And this personal struggle is always contextualized by life in a family and life in a larger human society. So it'll be a couple of days before you get to this, but in the others chapter, Russon is really clear about this. And I want you to read as quickly as you can because you need to be building these building blocks. So get working. We want to read, at the very least, we're going to read the first 110 pages. We're probably not going to end up reading the whole 150. I would love to, but it's probably not going to happen. But so you got to plan on how much time is left in this class getting through those 100 pages. So reading quickly. The goal of all of this is to understand, well, one of the goals is to understand self-esteem, because he says this is the fundamental struggle that defines our experience, is developing self-understanding and self-esteem, and that initially that self-esteem is always, like all human experiences, going to happen in the context of others. Other people do matter. I would love to be a Hallmark card and tell you that you shouldn't ever care what anybody else thinks of you, but that's going to turn out to be bullshit. You really do care, and you should care. Not just what any asshole thinks about you, but what important, meaningful people think about you. You can't think of yourself as kind and compassionate if everyone around you who truly knows you is like, no, dude, you're not kind and compassionate. Or maybe you have a lot of self-esteem in the fact that you think of yourself as funny. I'm a funny guy. I'm really funny. If none of your friends who know you and love you think you're funny, yeah, that's not really going to be a decent basis for self-esteem. If you think of yourself as a good, honest, caring friend who's very generous and you're always there for people, and the people you've been friends with for years are like, we love you, man, but you're not there for us when we need you. You're pretty selfish and you're not that generous. And like the opinions of the people around us do matter for our self-esteem. Initially, that happens in the family. Initially, what it means to have self-esteem is to have our self-esteem in the context of a group of others that are our family. So I'm a good son, right? Or I'm a good big brother, a good little brother. That's the context in which I need praise. And the kind of praise that I get, good job, Jesse, that praise is going to determine the kind of person I am. One of the things we're going to look at is gendered basis of this. When a little boy is always praised for things he does, and a little girl is always praised for how she looks. And all she ever hears is, oh, what a pretty little girl. Look at the pretty little girl. It's a pretty dress. You're such a pretty girl. Those pretty little pigtails. Did you do those pigtails? You're so pretty, 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 pretty. And they get all of this praise on how they look. That's going to affect their understanding of themselves, right? Their self-understanding is going to be rooted in their objective character and how they look. And that can create psychological problems and neurosis and can actually cause people to starve themselves to the point where they die. It's serious problem. We'll be talking about that at time, right? So the praise, your identity is given initially by the family, and then there's this troubled movement from the family out into the social world. And chapter 4 chronicles this very clearly, how we go from needing only praise from within the family to this larger social world, and this transition creates a logic that every human being, it doesn't matter your perspective on the world, doesn't matter, there's no relativism here, every human being undergoes this process. There are different forms of it. Sometimes it's really rapid, sometimes it's really subtle, sometimes it's really seamless because the family is almost exactly like the external society. Sometimes somebody grows up in a really weird family and there's this terrible break, or their family is killed and they end up orphaned, right? There are all these different ways this can take place, but this just is moving from being a child to being an adult. And the logic of how this happens is going to inform a huge amount about how the human psyche in general is structured and how society should be structured as a result. So, other people are really important. Okay. He says on page 1, this is slide 11 now. On page 1, he tells us that his point is to make philosophy relevant to our lives, to understand ourselves. And this will all, on page 1 and 2, help us understand neurosis. We'll talk about that. Look up what neurosis means. Okay, slide 14. This is very important. There are there are lots of different branches of continental thought. We're going to distinguish two broad ones. The first one is phenomenology. Heidegger, Sartre, Merleau-Ponty, Hegel, these guys are the main influences on Russon's work. But he says there's this other group that he talks about on page 3, who make some very strong claims about human experience, about what he calls the motors of human experience. Read that paragraph, the big paragraph on the bottom of 3, very carefully. There are this second group of people, Marx, Freud, Deleuze, and Guattari. Don't worry about Deleuze and Guattari. Marx and Freud primarily, who make the claim that who we are is largely not under our control. We're not autonomous. We are largely determined by our community and determined by our society. And so this is a massive threat to human autonomy. So what I want you to do is to think very hard about this video that I've linked to on slide 17. It's a long video, but it's very important. I want you to watch it and think specifically about the Milgram experiment and the Stanford prison experiment. So watch that, pause it, come back. Okay, so you're back. You've watched this video. Hopefully you're disturbed by the Milgram experiment. Two-thirds of people were willing to shock another human being who'd done nothing wrong, who they never met before, who they didn't hate, willing to electrocute them to death if put in this situation. The prison guards in the Stanford prison experiment, normal kids, started behaving in incredibly abusive ways as a result of the uniform they were put on and the social situation they were put in. This suggests that there's no real deep character to human beings, that human beings are determined by their environment. So for example, in the Milgram experiment, you don't give a guy a moral education and then send them in there. That's not how you have an effect. It doesn't matter what those people's religion are, or what their gender is, or what their race is. We did it but we've repeated the Milgram experiment over and over and over and over again, and it's always 66%. It's always two-thirds, unless you change something about the social structure that person is in. For example, if you put the person being electrocuted actually in the room with them, the compliance drops way down. Way fewer than 66% of people are willing to kill them if they're closer, if they can actually see the person, not just hear them over the radio. Third, if you put the person so close to them that instead of just flipping a switch, you have to grab their hand and touch it to a plate, and that shocks the person, it's all staged, of course, then the compliance drops to like 5%. And so the message would seem to be, the message from social psychology and anthropology and sociology would seem to be that people's moral character and internal life and thinking and autonomous decision-making is not the source of our humanity and our identity. It doesn't lead us to make moral or immoral actions. What leads us to make moral and immoral actions are the situation we're put in, right? That we conform to those situations, and we are controlled, and our identities and our experiences determined by those situations. If that's the case, then we're not autonomous. We don't govern ourselves. And so Russon says he was massively influenced by these studies and by these thinkers, by Marx, by Freud, by psychology, by sociology. It's a massive influence. We can't ignore these studies. These studies are revealing very disturbing truths about humans. I want you to see that these things are true, but that's not the whole story. Russon wants to say, no, we're massively influenced by our environment, but people can, by rehabituating themselves, develop autonomy. And so what he says there on slide 17, you see, page 3, he says, while I'm influenced by these people, they're not the center of my work. The center of my work is this first school, Merleau-Ponty, Hegel, Sartre, Heidegger, these guys. These guys, Marx and Freud, and these psychologists and sociologists are not the center of his work, because he wants to defend the autonomy of the developed forms of human experience. We have to develop these forms of experience. This isn't something that we're just given. We're not given freedom. We have to earn our freedom by rehabituating ourselves, by understanding who we really are and learning how to change who we really are. We learn that our attitudes determine a huge amount of our experience in the world, and so we learn to change those attitudes. The Milgram experiment, if we discover we're the kind of person that's susceptible to authority in that way, we can cultivate habits of skepticism and resistance to authority. But that doesn't come easy. Initially, we conform. Initially, we're obedient, most of us, right? 33%. We're like, screw you, doctor, I'm out of here. And I want to believe I'm one of them too, but it's always hard to say unless you're actually in that situation. We'll talk about that in a minute, right? So Russon is defending human autonomy against this threat. So you need to understand what this threat is, but you also need to understand that he's not simply dismissing it. He's not just, Russ in his book isn't just saying, oh, and so, yeah, no, totally, you are who you are, and your morality comes from God, and you just look into your conscience, and everything will be fine. No. No. It's not that simple. You are being determined and controlled. You are in the cave, and you don't know it. We don't know. We are in the cave, and we don't know it. Our concepts are causing us to interpret the world in specific ways that are calling forth action. An action like, I'm going to shock this person to death, or I'm going to psychologically torture this prisoner. Those actions are called for in everyday, ordinary, non-evil human beings because of their conformity and adaptability to the situation that they're placed in. That's every damn day. That's how human beings actually are. We have to become more than that by investigating our means and the structures and concepts by which we interpret our experience and rehabituate our access to the world. Okay, slide 18. You can think more about this stuff. Page 4, so slide 19, page 4, he's following Descartes' method, but that there's a new, he's challenging it. He's coming up with, like, we're going to start with just, what do I know? What do I know for certain? And what I know for certain is not what Descartes knows for certain. Russon doesn't buy the dream argument, certainly doesn't buy the evil genius argument. What I know for certain that is that I am here, I am married, I have a job, I have a life. I got here as a result of goals that I set for myself and I achieved. I got my PhD, I got my tenure track position at a university, right? Like, I got here, I know that, I know I'm doing it because I want money, but I also want to feel good about my life. I'm seeking self-esteem. I want to feel like I matter. I want to feel like I matter in the world. That's what I know. I know that I love my mom and I love my wife and I've got these things happening. Let's start there. Let's examine what's going on with my actual experience. And from that basis, let's see if I can figure something out, not just about myself, but about what human beings everywhere, on all ages, all genders, all races, all religions, are going through their experience. They don't have this job. They're not white. They don't have the incredible luck of being born a white male in the 20th century in America, where we're just given all these incredible privileges, right? It's way harder to be a woman of color, or like, I can imagine being a woman who's a lesbian and of color in this country. You'd have to fight so many battles that I didn't have to fight. I was just given, just handed things for free. It was really easy. I got very, very lucky. My wife is a Latina, not as lucky, right? Not as lucky. I had to fight a lot of battles I didn't have to fight. Still has to fight battles I don't have to fight. And so I'm going to examine that experience. That's what I'm going to look at. That's the goal, is to understand how I became who I am and to see how everybody from all their different backgrounds are undergoing that same struggle, just from very, very different angles. And if we can understand how everybody is involved in this struggle of seeking self-understanding and seeking, ideally, mutual recognition, which is what we read on page 72, and we'll get to that, seeking self-esteem, seeking understanding one another, and living in a world and having a stable sense of self, that struggle for self-esteem and self-understanding is true of all people, and they all have a family and a society in the background. Okay, that's where we're going with all of this. Wow, okay. Slide 20 has some serious typos. I'll fix all that. You won't have seen that yet, but yeah, it's really bad. And so we're looking, hopefully this is all starting to become clear. And the last slide, 22, on page 17, what Russon tells us is that this whole story about investigating these themes in order to discover ourselves, one of the first things we discover is that I don't know who I am through immediate introspection. Right? I don't just say, let me look inside my mind. Yeah, I'm a nice, compassionate person, and I really believe in charity. Well, someone might say to me, well, why are you always mean to people And how come you never give money or volunteer at charity? You say you like it. You maybe in your introspection moments you say you like it. Or maybe I say I'm not racist. I'm not racist at all. But then I find myself getting tense and scared if there's a black dude on an elevator. Or maybe I cross the street or I'm like, oh geez, there's a black guy on the porch. I should see what he wants. But I get scared. Okay, I may say I'm not racist. I may look inside my head and genuinely have the belief, huh, yeah, no, I think black people are perfectly equal. That any differences in behavior are determined by society, not by race. I believe they should have full rights, and that there are tons of racist things, and I can believe in affirmative action. But then all of a sudden, oh shit, is that a black guy on the porch? And if it's a white dude, I'm just like, oh, no problem, right? I might actually be racist and not know it through simple introspection. Or I might not even be racist, but I might have certain racist or sexist or homophobic reactions to things. Maybe I'm not homophobic, but I see two dudes kiss and I get really nervous. Or maybe I'm not Islamophobic, but I'm really weirded out when there's a girl at Sacred Heart walking down the hallways with the burqa and you can't see nothing but the eyes. Maybe that just weirds me out. I'm not Islamophobic. I don't think we should bomb the Middle East back to the Dark Ages like racist idiots do. Um, but maybe I get a little tense and nervous about it, right? Maybe I don't exactly understand how to relate to people who wear the burqa. Does this make sense? So what I need to do to discover myself is not to go through into simple introspection, but to examine my experience. Well, if I'm going to do that, I need a way to do it, right? I need tools. And so what Russon is doing is giving us the tools, these 4 themes, through which we can analyze and pay attention to our own experience and discover who we really are. And in that process of discovery, we're going to learn the keys about how to structure society, raise our children better, relate to people of other religions and races and ideas, and to rehabituate ourselves. We're going to learn on what basis we can change the kind of people we are so that we can ultimately become better people. Again, not relativists. There's going to be a lot of things that sound like relativism because pretty much everything is going to be rooted in my perspective. But some perspectives are better than others. And ideally, my future attitudes and my future perspectives will be better than my perspectives now. That I will actually make myself a better person. And in order to do that, I have to do some analysis and figure out what values I should seek. Okay, that's enough for now.